back to another great episode of Security Out Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Denny Caballero, and with me today is an amazing human being, a champion of Green Berets and Gold Star families, and just a remarkable person who has quite possibly one of the best books that I have read in the new year. First book that I got for the new year, and I can't put it down. And with me today is Michelle Black. Her husband was Staff Sergeant Ryan Black from ODA 3212. And today we're going to talk about not just her book, Sacrifice, but her husband, the life they led, and what it really means to be a committed family in the regiment, because it's unlike any other job on earth. Michelle, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me come on the show. Like I was saying, anybody who's operated at that level, that's my favorite individual to talk to, is anybody who understands the right questions to ask me, and also so I can learn. So I'm so excited to be here and talk with you.
Yeah, it's as soon as I started reading the book, it was absolutely evident that this was somebody that was part of the family. And it's hard to imagine losing a teammate, losing your husband, but then having to piece it all together from the trauma, from the firsthand accounts, because you're in a vacuum. And when you think you're being brought into the fold to be given information, turns out we're not being given anything of relevance. It was, to put it lightly, just a smoke show. It seemed like you had to put on that mom hat and detective hat and then bring the boys in and be like, all right, guys, we got to tell our story. We got to figure out what the truth is. And tell me about that process. This is something that when I read your encounter, your story, your testament, the strength just pours out of the book. Like you're living through all the situation, but you're not going to let the machine and the regiment move through it without you going through and finding the truth. And that's like, I've been down in some lows, but I see the fight in you from the first page to the very end, and you pick that up and you're like, all right, we're going to get to it. Like, that's just kudos to you and to the team for sitting together and going through this process. And it's just remarkable.
Thank you. And, I think a lot of that, when you're talking fight, right? You look at Green Berets, you look at these special operators and who they are. And most of the time, they're going to marry people who are very similar, right? You marry your equal, you really do. And so I look at it as, I think the majority of women who are married to special operators, if they were to end up in my position and had to go through that whole thing, you'd see the same thing the majority of the time, right? And so that's all it is. I see it as Brian was my equal, and he was just this beast of fighter. And so, of course, I don't pick fights, but I was raised to end them. So that's kind of where that came from. The minute I had that vacuum situation and the people I was supposed to trust to bring me the truth, all the officers coming, and then I find out 5 months down the road that every one of those officers not only were lying directly to me, but that they were involved in the incident and they were at fault for the incident. So that I think that's part of what triggered it. By the time you've been through so much trauma and you realize there's nothing more that anyone can do to me. And I am not beholden to the military at this point. The worst thing they could do is what? Sue the widow, quit paying me, which, at that point you just go public, and that's a whole nother thing. So at that point, I realized that the men on the team were going to be facing, because all that blame was on them. Everybody said, oh, it's the team at fault. Absolutely. They are a bunch of rogue cowboys. And I knew this wasn't true. I'd known them for several years at that point, and I knew my husband.
Yeah.
There's no way he was going rogue. That was just beyond insane that that would be said about him or any of the guys I knew.
But it's a common,
So
it's now become this common thing that it's, yes, we have guys that don't do the right thing all the time, but it's become this stereotypical thing that is just thrown out there. The first thing is just these bad Green Berets out there doing horrible stuff that they weren't supposed to be doing, and they sold it. They sold it to everybody, um,
yeah,
and it's like, but like, you know your husband, you've seen him go through training, you've seen him go, and it's everybody else is now trying to Monday morning quarterback the entire situation as if they were there on the ground, and nobody's
yeah.
asking questions.
Even people who operate at that level. I've had so many people who are veterans of, special forces, or they currently serve, and they just hook, line, and sinker, and they'll come on and be like, the official narrative is the proper narrative. And I'm like, well, sit down and read through the book before you tell me that, because that's not true. That's not the official narrative from those who are actually present in country, on the ground, operating and running communications to those who were on the ground that day, which tells me the official narrative is very biased and inaccurate.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so they tried to sell that whole, or they did sell, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
that whole cowboy rogue team thing. And what was happening next is, after that was kind of out there, which was May 2018,
Yep.
they then began to say, hey, we're going to interview this team again. So now SOCOM and AFRICOM are looking at, we're going to go ahead and pull out the rules of the UCMJ on them and slap an Article 15.6. So that's what these guys were looking at, because they knew that if they interviewed a second time and their interviews varied even slightly, that they would then have grounds, or the military would then have grounds to say, hey, they were lying, and then bring them up on an Article 15.6. But when you're talking about interviewing guys the day after an incident versus 7 months down the road, you're going to get a different story.
Exactly.
You just are. And so these guys knew, and they were seeking legal help, and legal counsel said, do not talk. And I think at that point is when we kind of came together, and I pulled him aside and I was like, you're no longer under orders not to talk to the families. There wasn't an official, like, what would you call it, gag order, but there was this order from their command that they couldn't speak until after the official results came out and the families had been briefed. So the guys, of course, followed that so they wouldn't get in trouble. And right after they were released from that, that's when I talked to them and said, okay, you're going to be facing Article 15.6s. This is what I want to do. Their reaction was, we don't want you to become involved,
No.
which at that point I told them, hey, I'm already involved.
You're
The day
already
Brian
in.
was killed, yeah, I became involved. Like, what are they going to do to me? Kill my husband, play his death on TV, and then lie to me? Like, it's been done.
Yeah.
There really isn't anything else they can do to me or take from me. And I knew these guys couldn't stand up for themselves. I mean, isn't that always the case? The people who
Absolutely.
can't stand up for themselves are the ones who get blamed.
And people don't realize that that's they see the movies, they see the video games, they see the pop culture icon, and they think, well, if there's injustice, these guys, they'll get to the bottom of it. No, these guys have families. They have their entire careers. So
Yeah.
now it's, who else can do it? It's Michelle.
Yeah.
Michelle puts on the hat of investigator, author, and man, like, did you know? I think one of the biggest things that I, when I started reading, was like, I know this woman definitely like is a fact checker. She knows her stuff. Like, were you always in the understanding of like, I'm gonna take this, we're gonna publish this, or was it purely just for your own understanding and to make sure like guys have their side of the story heard? Or what was the drive, the motivation behind it?
My goal was to put out the other side of the story.
Yeah.
And I didn't think I'd really get published by a large publishing house. I thought, I'll throw that in like the idea pool.
Yeah.
I want to be on my way to publishing. So I wanted to have a publisher within 2 years of Brian's death. So 2000, see, if he was killed in October 2017, I wanted a publisher by 2019.
Yeah.
That was kind of my just throw out their goal. But the truth is, I assumed I'd end up self-publishing, and I didn't care as long as I could get out there and say, hey, these guys are innocent and this is their side. That was my only goal. I didn't think anyone would really listen to me. I mean, especially being a military wife, right? Like a dependa. So, I mean, that's how you're treated a lot.
It's a crappy,
right?
It's a crappy label that people put on there. But a military spouse is not, especially for our Green Beret wives, and it's a different breed. It's a different breed of human being that says, okay, this is what you want to do, and I'm in it. Like,
yeah,
like you said, we attract, if we're healthy and we're good people and we have everything, all our ducks in a row, we attract the right person that also has an equal drive and an equal capacity to achieve amazing things. And I've seen it whenever we have to take that knee or we get hurt. It's always that shield maiden, that strong Spartan woman that comes in, ends up picking up and taking care of us. And time after time again, it's shown us, like, our wives, we owe so much of our career, of our lives, everything we get to do for, we get to do it because of our wives. The people that we bring into our lives, if we're lucky enough to have them, they're remarkably strong and they're able to make anything happen. Like, everybody thinks that a Green Beret is just like the guy that can get everything done. No, I guarantee there's a wife at that house that has learned and can do just as much, if not more, than that Green Beret can, because ultimately, like, it's always been about supporting us, and it's more important at home. Like, the team life is great. They're not going to be there forever. It's always the family, and we've been able and blessed to have some great support, but they don't always get that support from the regiment themselves, especially when the worst of the worst case scenarios happen. And we tend to think that they're going to be given the same privileges and the same sort of care and compassion that we get when we lose a brother in combat. But oftentimes our families are treated like, well, you can't be brought into the fold. No, we can't tell you all the stuff. And that just, I'm sorry, that's wrong. If that family made the conscious decision that, yes, hey, we're going to do this, you're going to do this for a career, they're all in. The wife, the kids, everybody's in. You got to be able to treat them with the same decency, respect, and fidelity. You got to be able to come to them and tell them, hey, things didn't go right, and this is where we fucked up. This is where we messed up. I mean, I don't think there was ever a time where Brian would come home and say, hey, it's okay, it's totally cool if an officer just doesn't take leadership role important. No. from the moment he was in the Q Corps, is like, you knew that, hey, the officers ultimately, they're the ones that they sign off on it. It's their ass. And for everybody at that higher echelon to just kind of like pass and like kick the ball down to the lowest echelon was a kick in the fucking guts. It was horrible. And it's you don't see it until you start reading your book. You start seeing how the guys were consciously aware of, like, okay, this is not a good situation. Like, this is not good. Like, we should have our higher ups, they should be the one telling us, like, yeah, we agree, we concur, great job with the analysis on the ground. But it never happened. The guy on the ground was just dismissed. Like,
and the reasoning behind them, the upper echelon overriding that and not listening, again, we weren't allowed to be in the fold or whatever, and really be given any reason why they would be overridden. And, it's a shame, because the reality is, like you said, we come into it, the family, fully understanding and supporting. I mean, Brian knew, right? He's an adult. He knows what job he's doing, what risks come with it, that he could be killed. But I mean, even though he might not be entirely honest with me at the risk level, he's operating, say, this mission or that mission, or, telling me stuff like, oh, it's, Africa, it's relatively quiet. I mean, I know, even if that's completely true, things happen.
Yeah.
It's life, like he could roll his vehicle and die, or I don't know, but
The danger's there.
be randomly ambushed. So yeah, so when the news came that he died, yeah, I'm upset, but I'm not obviously, but I'm not thinking, this should have never happened. This is like completely unexpected. This He should never die at work. What I'm thinking is, okay, tell me what happened. Let's see it all laid out. And I'm not even thinking, hey, people need to be punished. Not that at all. What I'm thinking is, let's see what happened and see if there's anything that could have prevented it or help other teams in the future from dealing with this. Because I don't want other wives or other families to go through what I'm going through. But also, I know that it's war, and not everything's preventable.
Yeah.
So that's my thought process. Not I want to see heads roll or careers ended. It's life. People die. It's war. People die even more there. So, that's kind of my thought process. So when all of a sudden it became, not only are we going to punish all the wrong people, not be honest about what happened and why, but we're going to cut you completely out of the conversation and not answer your questions, or just basically come at you with this attitude of like patting me on my head and it's okay, Miss Black, you can trust us. The team's at fault. And I just thought, okay, we're done here. I'm not asking for answers anymore. I'm going to get them. And then you can just react however you react from there.
Yeah. And that's clearly evident in everything that we saw play out. It was just a really weird dance of shuffling individuals at higher echelons who were in charge and making sure that they were either removed or out of the light, never interviewed, never brought out into the limelight. Yet every aspect of everybody else was thrown out there. And
Yeah.
not to mention, everything else got super convoluted when it became a political thing. It was
Yeah.
removed. The importance of the issue was completely forgotten. Lives were lost. I mean,
Yeah.
we had a real situation at hand, and then it just became a tribal thing. One side is at the Democrats, Republicans, everybody's at each other's throats with how a phone
Mhm.
call played out and how something played out. And I can't even imagine what that was like for you, having to sit there and be like, hey, uh, guys, like, no, there's real things we need to talk about. And it just
Yeah.
sort of, everybody else's radar, it just kind of became a little dot and then gone.
Yeah. And I couldn't remain neutral. If I was going to speak out at all, it was either I'm supposed to say, yeah, Trump, or I'm supposed to say I hate Trump. And it's like, I don't care about him. He's not relevant to this story.
Yep.
Because honestly, they're a 12-man team in the middle of nowhere, Africa, operating generally at a pretty low level for an ODA. I mean, they're just doing basic reconnaissance missions and training missions with these teams that they're training over there, because they're in a by within through is their mission set. So of course, when they go out on this mission, no one's contacting the president. Presidents don't know what a 12-man team in the middle of nowhere Africa is
Yeah.
doing, especially since there's multiple teams out in the middle of Africa, doing all these like
Yeah.
kind of honestly irrelevant missions.
We're doing operations
So
all over around the world, and the American public is now, oh, we're in Africa. We're doing war in Africa. It's like, no, people. Like, that was the thing and I know you've gotten it too in the past with anytime your husband deploys, people calls like, where's he going? Where's he at? What's going on there? And it's like, guys, like, we do a wide spectrum of operations all around the world. We're helping people. We're training. We're teaching. It's not this idea that all of a sudden it became this political guess game of what they were doing, were they good guys, what they were doing, and then nobody was asking the right questions. I remember some of the text
yeah,
messages I was getting were just so asinine, like, hey, I'm a seventh group guy. Why are you asking me about Africa, dude? Like, no, like, I don't know what's going on. Like, of course I don't.
Yeah.
But people reach out to their network and they want to know the latest information. And it's never about the guys, the team, what happened to the guys on the ground. It was all just a political game show. It was so bizarre how, if it would have been any team in Afghanistan, if it would have been any other deployment in a combat theater in Iraq or Afghanistan, I honestly believe it would have been dealt with 100 times different in a completely better scenario, or a completely better way, and handled just in a complete different fashion. But it feels like they didn't even know what to do. That's the weird part. It felt like they were
Yeah.
jumping through hoops because they've lost all bearings and understanding of what to do in a military environment. It felt so awkward to see sort of like the veil or the curtain be lifted on what you think is a very competent, very capable machine at the higher echelons. Now you're just like, holy cow,
Yeah.
what are you guys doing? And all of us, everybody I talked to, the little bit of us, uh, all of us were mourning that entire year, trying to make sense of like, how did this get so bad? Is this how we are all across the board? Everybody started
Yeah.
looking at your battalion commander a little differently, your company command team a little differently. Like, you realize you're human, and you realize that, holy shit, when things get bad, are these guys, are they going to just kick the can down the road and blame it on detachment commanders, when clearly, like, every con op, you bless off on it? Like, that was the other
Mhm.
bizarre thing that I saw when the truth finally came out, was trying to shift blame to the detachment commander in a con op process. Oh, he just copied and pasted. I'm like, okay, so you send him out there with his guys. Where did he do the other con ops? Because that
Yeah.
didn't pass the muster test. Like, did he take an
No.
SDN out there? Was he out there typing away in the middle of the night to send up the next con ops? No. Come to find out, you're trying to say that he didn't do the right thing, but he couldn't have even done the thing you're saying because he didn't have access to be able to write or develop or send anything to you.
Oh, yeah. Well, and what blew my mind is when you look at, because I've watched the media, uh, media brief so many times.
Yeah.
And the big sticking point was the CONOPS, right?
Yes.
And so in my briefing, that's what I really pushed them on. But there was no pushing in the media brief on the CONOPS. But that was the big sticking point that I kept saying, well, okay, so you're saying the first CONOP led to the ambush. How many CONOPs were there?
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, well, there's 3. And I'm like, okay, so 3 CONOPs, 3 missions. Did Captain Perazini create the second CONOP? Well, no, Mrs. Black, he couldn't have. Okay, well, then where were those created? Well, that was created back at, such and such headquarters. Okay. But that was, given all the proper approvals and proper signatures. I'm like, okay, great. So who created the third con-op? Was that Captain Perazini? Well, no, Mrs. Black, he couldn't have. As we said before, he didn't have the proper, equipment. And I'm like, okay, so who created that one? Well, that's not really relevant because it had all the proper approvals. And I'm like, okay, so all these irrelevant con-ops that led directly to the mission that killed my husband and, caused the ambush, somehow we have no clue who created those. No clue who signed off on them, just that they were properly created and properly signed off on, except when I got my family redacted report and I went through that and I found that the third con-op, there's the 5 W's, and one of those was missing. And he didn't do a second threat assessment before sending them alone to the Mali border with absolutely 0 assets or a QRF.
Yeah.
which told me all I needed to know. The first con-op was not relevant. That third con-op was extremely relevant and directly led to loss of life. Everybody killed. Their lives are on the hands of that person who created that con-op, everyone who approved it and signed off on it and made sure to not do a second risk assessment, not check into doing all, like getting all the proper intelligence. Like they kept calling it gaps. No, it was a huge intelligence failure, and they didn't provide any assets to them. That's a like classic leadership failure.
Absolutely.
Those people all needed to lose their careers, not just for that call, but for what they did to the families and lying to the entire American public and blaming all the wrong people down the line.
Yeah.
But they're still operational.
And that's the thing that gets me is you caught them in another good situational point that they weren't ready to address was they made the team out to be these guys that were trying to do things behind back doors and trying to go out after danger, and that they weren't briefed. They briefed that they weren't ready to engage. Yet you read them the ROE. You gave them information that were going to be going in contact. The thing that gets me every single time I sit down and I re-engage with the story is, as a team, we're different than SEALs, we're different than Rangers, because we have the capabilities to sit down with our Fox, our team sergeant, our captain, a warrant, and your seniors and put together a beautiful plan that takes into account everything. Takes account your strength, your weaknesses, the enemy's strength, the enemy weaknesses, the terrain, everything. You can look through and use every resource you have. Whether you're in an op cen or out in the field, I will put my money on a detachment that has the full capabilities to plan with a good window. I'll put all my money on them against the world. But when you take a detachment and you already start them at a deficit, you don't give them the ability to plan. You don't give them the ability to refit. You don't give them the ability to dictate or do anything. You just put them in a no-win situation, and then you blame them. You blame them. Every single thing that we see play out in the incident, once the mission kicks off, is just absolute. We need to celebrate the men for continuing to persevere and continue on, constantly letting them know what the truth is on the ground. That captain was constantly reporting, doing his job, letting them know, and still leading his men.
Yeah.
And when things got completely, when things went south, when everything failed, they didn't. They took action. They went after it. They didn't quit. They didn't turn around. Everything about the mission, they would have been justified to go. But they still wanted to try to meet the commander's intent and they wanted to do what was right by their hire. But when it came time for hire to do right by their men, completely failed them at catastrophic levels, not just tiny levels. I mean, you go to Afghanistan and you submit a con-op for a remain over day mission. If you have one asset that you're not able to get, you're done. Pack it up. Wait for next window. Like, that's it. Numerous times you sit there, plan a mission, and you're waiting to go. Hey, we don't have this asset. We don't have this thing. All right, cool. Spin up, wait for the next one, next window. But the most viable thing, the most important thing that you always run your intel. If you get rolled hey, let's recheck it. Let's see what we get. Let's run it again. Maybe we get something maybe we get another int. We get something new, and we'll be able to make our packet that much stronger. You're on the ground, again, starting on a deficit, and you're already going through a mission where you don't have clear, viable intel. You have one thing you're going off of, and it's a cell phone. The most, try to maintain my composure, the most worthless thing to go off of. And they sold it like it was the holy grail of all intel collections. Like, it's not. everything you outline in the book, it's something that we've all learned firsthand in combat. Like, hey, dog, you're telling me all you got's a cell phone ping and you're telling me your objectives in the area? Nah, dude. Like, let's spin it up. Let's do something else. There's not enough
Yeah.
juice for me in this. I'm not going to go off there. I'm not going to take my dudes for a cell phone ping. Everybody knows that. Yet these guys at that high of a level are willing to say, like, this is it. This is what we need. This is what we're
Yeah.
going off of. And they,
Well, and when you add all that together too, right? The
yeah,
cell phone ping, the not doing your second threat assessment, and like all the assets getting turned around and now you have
yeah.
no assets. I mean, you add it all together and it's complete insanity.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. What was the resupply plan? Where's the emphasis on holding yourself accountable to your men by saying, hey, at this point in time, when you call in for resupply, I'm going to bring you. Our guys are sitting there without water, without food. Are you kidding
Yeah.
me? Like, no, that's like, that's the most
Yeah.
basic infantry and small unit tactics piece that you have to understand. Okay, they're okay, low on water, food. Okay, what about fuel? Can it make it all the way back? Like, maybe not. Maybe we got to take all that into consideration. Like, and
Yeah.
the fact that we knew going into this, like, you're expecting contact, but you tell them one or two guys. But okay, what's the where's the where's the intel? Give me a real no bullshit intel packet. Never. Guarantee that was never provided, never given to the team because they're nowhere to receive it. How can
Yeah.
you plan like that? And it's those are things that are so odd that nobody keyed in on to say, well, guys, like this doesn't smell right. This seems like a lot of key things aren't being done, and a lot of key individuals shouldn't be in leadership positions if they're missing this much of the operational picture. Like this is like you wouldn't let them go out the wire in Afghanistan and stay overnight like this.
Hmm.
Why would you do it here? And it's like is it complacency? You can't be because if you've done your study on the area, you know there's enemy in the area. You know there's a threat. There's a viable threat to American and your partner force. So what was it? And the only thing that's left in my mind is just gross incompetence and negligence. And
Yeah.
is that it? Was that what they were trying to hide? That the cognitive
Yeah.
abilities of certain individuals was that compromised? And it's to me that makes sense because the entire situation plays out like the only people that I would have trusted to really know what was going on and be able to make a solid situation was the ODA commander and the rest of his leadership on the ground that day. And the guy, forget the gentleman that was on the other assault team that they were trying to with the half capability they were talking to. So
Oh,
both,
the Team Arlet
yes.
commander.
So the two
Yeah.
commanders on the ground, they're in complete consensus. They're understanding, like, hey man, like this
Yeah.
does not make sense, and it just continues to go.
Yeah. Yeah, none of it made any sense. And you know what's interesting is in the aftermath of the investigation and as I started doing my interviews, I know how I felt, and I discussed it with my father-in-law, and over we discussed how it felt like the investigating officer had his conclusion before he began to run the investigation, and he tailored the investigation all to eventually reach this conclusion. But I hadn't really shared that with anybody. And then I went in and I interviewed some upper and lower level officers, and I was speaking with Major Alan Van Son, and he shared that same thing with me. He goes, the whole time just felt like the investigating officer had his conclusion and he ran that whole investigation in an effort to reach that conclusion. And he goes, I don't know if it was intentional. He goes, if maybe that conclusion was suggested to him. Um, but basically, like he'd never, he said he was basically kind of a desk jockey most of his career. So he, when he would say things to us like, well, there's no doctrinal definition for that type of mission. it began to make sense. I thought it's because he doesn't understand how these teams actually operate. And they're not bringing in people who have ever been on a team. They just have all these, like, legal
Yep.
and, so
Random
we've got
pieces.
attorneys, we've got, yeah, and we don't have people who have actually been there, done that, and understand, no, this is entirely normal. And I think that's where some of that language came in, where it's, hey, this was a cut and copy, copy pasted document and that kind of thing. Because anybody who's operational will tell you, no, that's exactly what we do,
You have
and
shells.
when
You
it
have
comes to,
operational shells all the time.
yeah,
It for every single, and what people don't understand is that there's people talk about administrative nightmares in the civilian world. You've never dealt with a headache of trying to fit PowerPoint into modern warfare. That's everybody has this sexy idea of what it's like to be this operator, and like, no, the reason why you want to be a Green Beret is because you're an analytical thinker. You're somebody who can critically think, and you know how to read and extrapolate data, and you want to be the person that can control your destiny. That's why you
yeah,
want to be a Green Beret, because you get to plan your mission. Get to plan your mission. And our guys did not
yeah,
get that chance.
no,
It was, you sit there and you have all these con up shells for all the different things in the world that you could be doing. And then okay, I'm going to be doing this, bring that over, dates, authorities, everything has to change, all the stuff, but it's all going to be beautifully formatted, beautifully dressed, right dressed. So, of course, all the pre formatted stuff, the colors, the blocks, everything's going to be ready. The content you have to put in there. And it's not a copy and paste like you're just mindlessly. No, it's not like that. But they're making, instead of being able to write out a well articulated Word document, you have to put it in a PowerPoint. So some guy that gives two shits about you and your team sitting there going from one meeting to another meeting can look up at oh, yeah, that looks good. Yeah, okay, where are you going to go? Okay, yeah, good. I believe, yep, go, that's good. And that's supposed to give me warm and fuzzy. You understand what I'm doing? And that's in combat. So if they're so nonchalant about it in combat, I can only imagine the reason why these individuals didn't know what was going on, because they didn't take the time to really understand. Nobody was really sitting down in that ops end at the AOB level or up higher trying to figure out what was really going on, because they're not invested in it. You're not going out
yeah,
there putting your ass on the line. It's the guys on the ground. That's the team that should have been back there. If you wanted them to do that mission, if you really wanted them to go out there and take the fight to the enemy, bring them back. Give them a planning timeline. Give them the tools and the considerations to actually be able to be effective in their job. Because it's not anybody can squeeze a trigger. That's not
yeah,
why. That's not why you want us. That's not why you need us. You need guys that can think and plan and have the ability to get on the ground and execute that plan. But you started them off at a deficit without the ability to know what they were going into. You didn't give them a con op with a target package. You didn't, there's a lot of fighting guys, a lot of awesome forces out there that get everything given to them. And hell, they're great
yeah.
guys, but they have a huge backside support. No, what we got is a really burnt out Fox, a really burnt out Warrant, a fucking captain that hasn't gotten any sleep, and a team sergeant that's managing a whole bunch of dudes trying to do all this planning when they have resources, when they have an uplink and downlink where they can get information. But when you don't have that, how are they supposed to be able to get the most pertinent information for their area? And they're going off of just phone calls and information. Yeah, they're
Yeah,
about one or two fighters. That's not reliable.
yeah,
Like, and nobody brought that up. Nobody talked about how badly they were failed. Nobody flew in the
yeah,
middle of the night with a whole bunch of information. All right, sit down. I need you guys to go over this. Nobody, there's no magical uh downloadable friggin' virtual reality planning kit. Like, that doesn't exist. We don't have those capabilities. So if you want the
yeah,
guys to be able to do their job, let them do it by giving them the right amount of time to prepare for it. And they never got that. And that's the
yeah,
part that's just like blaringly staring, obviously, like they never had any opportunity to really study or know what was going on for that day, what was coming for them.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's so true. And the thing is, they set them up for failure, right? And the team gets ambushed over there, and then they come home, and then they get attacked, blamed, and basically ambushed by their own
their own community.
leadership that sent them into that situation, and they're in their own community to this day still, oh, those guys,
Yeah.
and like I said, I still get messages that are like, oh no, the leadership's narrative is correct, and it's just like, well, you know that's that, if that makes you feel better at your job, or while
Yeah.
you're operating, that's great, but like,
Yeah.
it's not true.
No. And anybody that it's a real convenience to be able to sit back and watch little green dots on a PowerPoint play out templated positions where so and so might have moved here and this person might an enemy could have come around here,
Mhm.
and that briefs well. And you'll get a lot of young guys that are willing to say like, yeah, I would have done it differently, I would have done that. I'm like, would you
Yeah,
would you have? Because let me tell you something, you don't want somebody trying to quarterback you when you get fucking ambushed out of, you don't know what's going to happen until you're there in that moment. And there were so many people in the community who forgot about that and decided to uh, buy that lie, hook, line, and sinker. And I'm like, you don't know
yeah,
this is the real way, that you don't understand. You're not able to talk to the gentlemen that were on that ground that day. Those are your brothers. Those dudes went through
yeah,
the same Q course you went through. And because you saw a photo on TV and you saw a friggin' TV reporter that you don't even like, that you don't even respect, say something, you're like, yeah, bunch of cowboys. I'm like, no, no.
yeah,
Because if it were you, you'd want them to reach out or at the very least tell people, like, you don't know what it's like. You've never went to the Q course. You've never done combat. You've never been to a mission like this. So you don't know what it's like. At the very least, you weren't there. You don't
yeah.
have that knowledge.
Yeah, and I guess in that same idea, all of these people who operate, other ODAs and other special operators who all do the same job, who were so willing to jump on it. That was another thought process of mine as I stepped in to write this was, well, what better person than the widow of one of the guys killed to say, hey, these guys aren't at fault.
Yeah,
If I don't blame them and I can't blame them, then you need to take a second look at how you are viewing them.
absolutely.
So,
That was the
yeah,
that was another beautiful thing that I looked at it from the lens of, this had to be healing in a way. This had to help the trauma for the team to be able to sit down with you and share the experience, to share what they went through. Because you're living that trauma every single day. You weren't there on the ground with them, but you're there. You're experiencing everything from that day still. A lot of us
yeah,
never get that. A lot of us leave a team and we never talk about the horrible stuff we did together. We never talk about the near misses. And then years later, you wonder why, when you finally have a team reunion or you finally meet back up with a friend, it becomes this emotional thing where you just, you finally, of course, everybody gets liquid courage and everybody's finally like, I can't believe we survived that. And it's like, man, like
yeah,
that's not the way we're supposed to process emotions. Like, you're not
yeah,
supposed to process this in a confines of your bedroom by yourself, like drinking
no,
yourself away. And I see this as a silver lining in your gift and ability to sit down with the men from the detachment, to be able to have that space. I remember in the book you write about cooking dinner. Sounds like the best way to get a Green Beret vulnerable enough to talk about stuff like this. And that's so true. Like being able to bring somebody in that is not only feeling remorse and guilt, but feeling like they can't talk about it with anybody in the world. The one person they know they can talk about it with, man, I know I can talk with Michelle about this. Michelle's one of us now. And
yeah,
that's something you've given everybody on that team. You've given them the ability to sit down and be vulnerable and share and grieve with you. Um, and that's one of the most big, and I can't express to you how vital that is for everybody in the community. Everybody that's deployed
yeah,
and has lost somebody, that doesn't talk about it, doesn't share it. And I think that that's something that this is going to, I mean, I know for a fact you guys are still close. Like, do you feel that
Yeah.
bond as a byproduct of having that, being able to have those discussions?
Oh, yeah. It was amazing because I don't know what triggered it, but from the first day they came home, they're coming and they're apologizing to me. And the minute I set eyes on them, I thought, oh my gosh, like they can't apologize to me. So I made that a rule. They weren't allowed to apologize to me, first of all, because that's them saying sorry that Brian's dead and that they survived. That's how I saw it. And I knew that Brian died to bring them home. So they didn't get to apologize to me for his decision.
Yeah.
The other thing was giving them, at our unit memorial, I gave a couple of the guys gifts just because I knew like Brian would want them to have this. He'd want them to know like he's glad they're home.
Yeah.
And so I think just from the beginning, when everybody was blaming them, to just say, I don't blame you. And I'm glad you're here. And Brian is glad that you're here.
Yeah.
That kind of set that up early for us to just have that trust. And so by the time we were talking, or I wanted to interview them, yeah, there was this trust already where they felt safe and comfortable in my house. They knew that it was an open door policy. They could come visit my boys anytime. And for them, that was almost like being able to remain close to Brian.
Yeah.
So that gave them that opportunity to just come in and we talk about all sorts of things. But once the investigation and the briefings were over, then that's when it turned into, what can I do for you? And really, I think they saw it as something they were doing for me.
Mm-hmm.
And for Brian, taking care of his spouse and letting her tell their story and do whatever I could with it to benefit me. But that's not how I saw it. I saw it as a way to bring the truth out, kind of show them as innocent in the eyes of the public for once.
Yeah.
And I felt like if I could do that and bring them some healing and some justice, that would be a good thing. And it brought me so much relief. So I think through that, yeah, it was amazing. What I didn't expect was, as I began to interview them and so I would sit down and we'd talk for hours and, crying and laughing and going through all this stuff and different stories they would share with me that would just hit me so hard. Like this flag behind me he belonged to this Casey, who was on the advanced operations base, working out the advanced operations base, but he brought a lot of the guys to the team. And so he knew Brian the whole time he was on 3212. And so when Brian was killed, when all the bodies were brought back, Casey had to wrap the bodies. And so he wrapped Brian in his own personal flag. And it was a smaller flag. And so when the plane came to transfer the bodies to Dover, he was handed his flag back and they put bigger flags on the bodies. And so he came over and he was telling me the whole story of pulling the bodies from the helicopters that had picked them up and covering them. And it was such an emotional story. And then he brought me this flag. And so I ended up writing that story first and just sending him his own copy of just that portion of our interview, and to see the way that affected him, and how much that meant to him to see his own story that he told me written down as like from another person's perspective or from my perspective. It was incredible to see the way that affected him. And if I could do that for people for the rest of my life, I would be like, it was such a gift for both of us. So, yeah.
One of my first book for the year, and it's already, I love the way you've structured the story. I love from start to finish the way we're introduced to you and Brian, and the way that I can see a little bit of every Green Beret, or a little bit of myself when I met my wife, a little bit of the way we carry ourselves around our spouses, because I'm a firm believer that we're such a small percentage, like 1% of the 1%, that there's
Yeah.
like the movies, the sci-fi books, the things that we all like, there's a common thread to all of us as Green Berets. I see the mannerisms you describe, and I'm like, I did the same thing with my wife. Like, I did the same thing. Like, and being able to see that genuine love and true depiction coming through, and understanding where that solid bond came through was beautiful. And that's something that, Hollywood doesn't show it. TV's, they don't show that side of the Green Beret. They don't show that side of the family. The real thing that matters is the family bond. That's what keeps us able to do everything that we do. Um,
Yeah.
I tried doing it without it for a long time. It doesn't work. Like, the best part of my life, the best part of my career, um, or honestly, with when I was married with my wife, being able to know that, like, okay, I can be Chief Caballero at work, but as soon as I come home, I'm Denny. I have my wife here. Like, this is my everything. This is the thing that's gonna this is my pillar. Whenever I get home, like, I don't have to worry about stuff at work, because without that, that's all we are. Having that
Yeah.
family is arguably what makes us successful. And reading that in the book, that's how I know. I never had the pleasure of meeting Brian. Never got the pleasure of knowing a good portion of the people depicted in that book. But I know so much more now, looking through the lens of how you wrote them, that it's like, I would be honored and privileged to have worked with any of them on an ODA. They're just the
Yeah.
best depiction of who we are, and you don't get that without authors like you. Um, like, I have to commend you. I know it's not an easy thing, but you executed it beautifully. Uh, and
Thank you.
it's something that I hope more people reach out, get it, read it, because we don't honor, we don't do a great job of honoring our guys if we just keep it to our community, in the memorial, in the garden, in the rock gardens, in the memorial uh, buildings that we build up for our guys. We do a better job when we show the rest of our community and our society what it means to be a Green Beret, what it means to be a good, soft Green Beret, and like honor the full person. And reading it in that book, you get a full depiction of your family and why Brian was such a stand up, wonderful member of our community. Like, there's
Yeah.
all the little stories and the mannerisms about him with the 320. I'm like, oh, I did that in Afghanistan. Like, that was my favorite weapon system. That's like, you immediately put people like into quiet mode when you start shooting that thing. Like, people don't want to come out of the woodwork, and seeing all those things that you weaved into the story, it's like, this is perfect. If it was written by anybody else, you wouldn't have gotten the authentic and true, like, connection and love and empowering message of, like, we're not going to let this go quietly into the night. Like, the story needs
Yeah.
to be told. I can't thank you enough for doing that. Um,
Yeah.
what does life look like for you now? 2023. Are you writing more? Is there another book in the series coming out? Is there something else? What is next for you?
Well, I'd love to write more. I know for me, that's something I took a little break. I've been just mostly working on, trying to get publicity around the book and try and get it out there. So because there was a documentary and that kind of overshadowed it, so most people aren't aware of the book. So I've been trying to get it out there and get it a lot of publicity on it, and that's been going pretty good. But I kind of hit this point this summer where I was like, okay, I need to switch over into something that is making a difference, because that's what I started this book for,
Yeah.
right? To serve those guys at the team level. So I've started something now called Soldiers Alliance Foundation, which is a nonprofit, and we're going to start working towards basically policy and legislative changes that will hopefully positively impact lower levels military members that are operating, you know, whether it's Marines or Army or whatever. So the first thing we're going to work towards is changing the way investigations are done so that commands cannot investigate themselves. So
Yeah.
that's our first thing that we want to go
Which
for.
is like a
And we
no-brainer,
do,
right? Like that, like
yeah,
that's like,
yeah,
hey, I got a DUI, guys, but don't worry, I'm gonna do the investigation myself. Oh, thanks, Denny. Yeah, no worry, no worry. And it turns out not guilty. Oh, great. And that literally
yeah,
happened. That this is a we tend to think that the civilian world is like the crazy one, that where so much loony stuff's going on. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of crazy stuff there, but what you just said is a huge thing that nobody talks about. Nobody
yeah.
talks about it. Like, how did that come about? And please tell me more about this, because how can we help?
Yeah, well, you know what's amazing is my husband Brian, his best friend growing up that they used to go and play chess tournaments all over, the state with. He was a Republican Party lobbyist, and he just now he does consulting and different things. And we're sitting down one day catching up, and he just goes, "Why don't you like look into starting a 501c4?" And I'm like, "Well, why would I do that?" He goes, because your whole thing was about justice. He goes, but you haven't technically followed that all the way down to the end. He goes, so why not do that? He goes, that's clearly where you have a passion. And also that'll bring people in. They'll share your stories. You can write those stories, but you can also use those stories as you write them to promote legislation and then move things forward. So as you see other things that are problems that need to be fixed, you find people, you interview them, you write, and then you work towards legislation. Then you go and you speak before Congress, you speak before these people pushing your legislation. So I've started doing a lot of speaking, um, which I am not a public speaker until just probably this last year. I've started doing a lot of big, 200, 100 plus
That's
crowds,
awesome.
whatever. So that's been very interesting and fun. But yeah, so I go out and I'll either share my story and then get to the end and then bring up, this is what we're doing next. This is the legislation we need to get behind. This is what we're, so look us up, start supporting us. So we just got our website is kind of, it's like 90% done. So we're in the process of doing that. And then we're actually just going to start our board meetings this month.
That's
So
awesome.
it's all brand new. And we'll do other things as well, like, the nonprofit side, as far as 501c3, which is more like I want to do some stuff for widows, where we do maybe, I don't know, self-defense classes or something to that effect. And then maybe some things for teenagers. There's not a ton out there. I know there's Gold Star Teen Adventures, which is amazing, and my kids have been a part of. And usually I have to ship them to the East Coast. So I'd like to see if we can't come up with something on this end of the world, or on this end of the country, to kind of get some stuff going for kids here as well through my organization. So that's kind of the plan, is do some nonprofit stuff, but also do some legislative stuff. So
That's huge. That is, yeah.
yeah.
I
And
need.
so hopefully another book will come out of that. But yeah, I feel like if I start focusing too much on a book, that becomes the goal,
Yeah.
right? And then your focus is, well, maybe I'll just write a fiction, or maybe I'll just, and I'm like, I don't want to do something that doesn't have a purpose
Yeah.
or, affects people, because that's really the most rewarding thing through this book, knowing that this both affects people, changes their perspective either on military sacrifice, Green Berets, or just also the way it affected the guys on the team and those who operate, knowing that somebody's there who will stand in the gap. So all of that gives me a lot more passion when I'm doing it. And then I'm going to do a much better job.
No.
So I don't want to just write to write. I want to write to
With a
affect
purpose.
change,
Yeah.
essentially.
No,
Yeah. And
everybody needs
so,
a champion, and that's something that we forget. We look at Green Berets and we think, oh, they'll be fine. No, they can't talk. They can't defend themselves. They can't go out there, and we see it across the board with MARSOC 12, same thing.
yeah,
They were drug through the fire and beaten and put down and called every horrible name, and come to find out they didn't do anything
Yep.
wrong for years, and nobody wanted to stand up and fight and support them except for their actual commander. That was the only person that was willing to fight and constantly fight the narrative that they were war criminals. And he kept fighting and fighting and fighting for years and years. And finally, they get a small, tiny blurb. And it's because people tend to think that, oh, they'll be fine. Like, no, that trauma, that impact, that pain, that guilt and shame compounds over years. If you let somebody believe that they failed, if you let somebody believe that they didn't do the right thing, no matter how much they believe it's the truth, eventually you'll wear them down. You'll wear their spirit down. And when you extinguish the fire from somebody's spirit and heart and soul, you give them no other option but to just quietly die, or worse. And when we've seen that play out time and time again, and it's because of you. It's because of you willing to champion and be their superhero and champion their cause and write this book that we all know the truth. That we're not sitting here being lied to and spoon-fed by the media or by unreputable websites that just want to publish, garbage that isn't the truth because they want to look cool on clickbait on social media. But it's, again, I can't thank you enough for your time, for allowing me to blab and talk so long. But it's man, it's a powerful thing to sit down with somebody that is not only a survivor, that is a champion for others, but somebody that was able to overcome trauma, overcome such a painful situation and say, nope, I'm going to take care of the boys. Because we always say it. We always say that we're going to take care, we're going to do what's right. And then it doesn't happen. Then we're left out here thinking that, oh, our command's going to take care of us. But no. But our wives, our spouses, they're always there. And I wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart and from all our listeners. Michelle, thank you for being here. And thank you for being a badass, an amazing champion of Green Berets, and one hell of an author. The book, again, is Sacrifice. I can't recommend it enough. As soon as I can, because I also do our web development along with Tara. Shout out to Tara. She does everything for us. We kind of dual hat the website development. We are trying to get our book stuff squared away so we can put your book on there and some other ones. But
thank you.
As soon as we can put the link in there, we'll drop it in there. But yes, please go out there and get as many copies as you can of Sacrifice and read the truth about what really happened on that date in 2017 and how we can go about telling the truth about this incident. Again, Michelle, thank you so much. Till next time, guys.